Welcome to Somebody Asked Me with Janice Case, the podcast where we take questions I've been asked in the past from so many different roles, along with questions you'll ask and we'll ask together to, learn. Along the way, we'll build our capacity to become a community of problem solvers. I'm your host, Janice Case. Let's get to it, shall we? Welcome everyone to episode 11 of Somebody Asked Me with Janice Case. I'm here, of course, with the lovely Melissa, who is at my side now when we do these intros and wrap-ups, and I really love that. I love having another set of eyes on the thinking and the learning that we experience through these interviews. So, Melissa, here we are, still continuing to navigate this COVID-19 world. All of us kind of doing it in our own way. And I will say right out of the gate, I'm going to ask you how you're doing. Last week when we chatted, you made a comment that really was helpful for me, because you talked about how you had to finally kind of come to terms with the idea that it is perfectly okay to go to work every day. And by that, I mean sit in your house and do your job, because that's what we're doing now. And then come home, i.e. stay home, and just simply decompress and be done and get up and do it again the next day, right? Versus feeling like I should be accomplishing more because, I'm in the midst of this. And I feel like I have a really good balance, but hearing you say that out loud was super helpful to me, because it made me realize, especially during the week, that was okay, that it was okay that I wasn't getting to that list of things that I wrote back on March 13th thinking that I would get to. And it also really reinforced for me, I'm trying really hard to take at least one full day on the weekend off from work. So if I'm going to check email, if I'm going to do whatever, I'm limiting that to one day and only a couple of hours versus letting it bleed, because that's the other thing we talked about. Like, it's right now, work and life and home are bleeding into each other, and it's hard to set the boundaries. So thank you for that. Tell us how you're doing.
You're very welcome. I still feel like I'm spinning. Like, I don't know that I know that I'm practicing what I preach just yet, but I'm working on it. You know what I mean? I really am making a conscious effort to work on it, but it's still very much a struggle for me to get used to this. I'm a person that is pretty good with routines. I'm a Virgo, what can I say? So getting up, going to work, leaving work, coming home, having that change has been really hard for me.
Sure.
And that's me as a single person. I can't imagine what it's like now with people with a house full of kids, with working from home, with, having to help with schoolwork. Like, I just really hope people understand that it's okay however you make it work. Like, there's no pressure to do it a certain way. There's no pressure to get it perfect. It's just getting through it. And getting through it is something to be proud of.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I love that line. And I think that, from a social media perspective, as you kind of keep tabs on people and how people are doing through that medium, I'm starting to see people say, all right, I got to get out of my sweatpants now. Okay, I got to actually put on, something besides leggings. Okay. And A, I think, or not, right? If that makes you okay, or not. But B, I will say, and of course, because of all the hats I wear, this won't surprise folks, but if you feel like you've got to do something, I would say encourage folks to let that something be take care of themselves. Like, just what can you do to feel better yourself, physically, emotionally, etc. Like, don't make the first thing you do, organizing the garage. How about think in terms of the simple stuff, right? Take the long walk like we've talked about, start building in some exercise. Think about how you're eating. Like, if you're going to do something, I would encourage people to put their energy there, because once you start taking care of yourself, suddenly you actually have more energy to maybe do some of that other stuff that felt like you were going to get done.
Nailed it. You've absolutely nailed it.
So
that's number one. Like, you have to take care of you during this, mentally, physically, emotionally, however you need to do it. Make yourself a priority. Like, the world will tell you, society will tell you, that you have to come out of COVID with a PhD. You do not.
Speaking French.
Simple. You do not.
Nope.
You don't have to do anything but make it through and come out sane and healthy. That's what's important.
Amen to that. Amen to that. So that's our weekly COVID advice. Not that anybody solicited it, but hey, we have a platform, so we can do that. So let's talk about the episode this week. We've been building on this 4-part series And this 4-part series around trauma was born because somebody asked me over the years, actually many times, especially in my educator role, right? How do I even begin to, in that world of education, for example, how do I even begin to help kids learn when they are in crisis, because more and more that's what we have showing up on at our school doorstep is kids who are in crisis. And so that led to me talking with Michelle and Lisa, who folks have heard now for a couple of different episodes about trauma and how kids experience trauma and how we support kids. And we've talked about that in terms of parents and educators, because we realized, okay, there's a whole gamut here that we need to tackle. And so they did a really beautiful job of giving us some basics around how we define trauma, how we assess trauma using that ACE assessment, the Adverse Childhood Experiences Assessment, for both ourselves, by the way, and for kids, to really begin to understand this idea that that trauma is a result of how we experience the world around us, really, in its simplest way. So we then knew, okay, once we've talked with the experts, if you will, and gotten that baseline understanding, let's go ahead and talk to some people who've lived it, right? And frankly, I think most of us, having learned from Michelle and Lisa, are probably thinking, yeah, I did experience to some degree, and or, yeah, my kid has experienced to some degree. So let's talk to somebody who's been through it. So I intentionally invited Charlotte Payton, who is one of my friends. She came to me originally through Fasterway, and we'll talk about that in the interview. But because I felt like she's somebody who has been through it. Now I'm sure we're gonna learn that once you have a child who's had some kind of experience like that, you're never on the other side, so to speak. But hopefully you do get to a point where you are through a crisis, and everybody is getting a really strong hold on how to support and kind of live with, etc. So I asked Charlotte to join us because I knew that her daughter Sabrina is in her early 20s now. And so my hope in this conversation with Charlotte is that we're going to be able to kind of hear her story, and in it have her be able to reflect back then and think about knowing, if I knew then kind of what I know now, if you will, right? How would I have navigated that differently? So the goal there is that folks will hear somebody who didn't go through it perfectly. That's not the point of talking to Charlotte, but instead somebody who experienced it, and then with our learning, coupled with our learning from Michelle and Lisa in those first 2 episodes, how we might do things in a way now moving forward with kids to support them in the moment in a way that it helps them kind of become well-adjusted, be able to navigate day-to-day life successfully, etc. So that's what I'm hoping we're all going to take away from this conversation with Charlotte. So without further ado, I'm going to say, let's get to it. All right, Charlotte, thank you again for joining me. I really love that, there's always pros and cons about social media, but one of the things I love about social media is that it draws us to each other in unique ways. So we know each other because we were first introduced through my role as a Fasterway coach, because you became a part of that Fasterway community, and it's been wonderful to see that evolve. But so when I was doing this series, and when I knew that I was going to be doing a 4-part series on trauma, I knew I wanted to talk with both a parent and a now adult child, but about an experience, right? So that we could take what we heard from episodes 1 and 2 and really think about it in terms of kind of people who've lived it, right? So I was drawn to you and Sabrina, that we'll talk with next week, because I saw your sharing on Facebook, right? Some things that you've shared along the way that have been very personal, but also hugely valuable to other people because you're willing to be open and to share it. So I love that you're here. Thank you for that. Why don't you start by just kind of telling folks a little bit about yourself, whatever it is you want them to know as we start our conversation.
Sure. So I'm Charlotte, and I am a mother to 3 children. I think from the time I was a very young girl, I wanted to be a mom. That was my biggest goal in life. And yeah. I think I started plotting how I was going to mother from a very young age. And we'll talk about that again a little bit more. But the background is that Sabrina started battling with anorexia at 13. That's when we started seeing some signs that she was really struggling with anxiety and body image. And we started watching her lose weight, and we started trying to find her support. And it was off and on. Kind of thought, we were on top of it and aware, because we thought we had kind of interceded at the right time. It all came to a head when she was 17, and she was, 14% body weight. And
wow.
Her organs were failing, and her body, bones were shrinking, organs were shrinking, and it became a really bad situation. And trying to work with her through that, watching her struggle through that, was, probably, I can tell you, the most difficult thing I've ever done. And I hope I never have to do anything harder.
Of course.
And she's, she wasn't a believer in her anorexia initially. It took her another 3 or 4 years to accept what had happened to her.
Okay.
And it wasn't until she was 20 and had hit rock bottom again and knew that she had to be the one to fix the problem.
Okay.
That she really started healing, committed herself to a program, in inpatient and outpatient program in California. It all came from, she initiated all that. And that was when she really started to make progress, and owned it, and watching her recover. And then not just recover, but she's actually taking her experience now and trying to support other people and to help women accept their bodies, and to help people understand mental illness. And, it's kind of becoming her life's work. So seeing that from that 17-year-old, completely, crumbled human being that was my daughter, to this now more confident, and she's not perfect. She's going to battle anorexia and anxiety the rest of her life, but she's come so far from where she was, that day we brought her home from Johns Hopkins. It's been a roller coaster journey for sure.
Well, and again, such a personal journey, which is why it's so powerful that both of you are willing to talk with us, because I think it's one thing when we think in terms of kids who, who have experienced trauma, to think about all the things we learned in the first 2 episodes. It's another to think about them through the lens of a child. So situate it a little bit for me. So you have 3 children. Sabrina's now 20. What are the ages of your other kids?
So she's actually 22 now.
Oh, she's 22. Sorry, that's right.
Yeah, that's fine. And I have a 19-year-old, almost 20. He'll be 20 next week. And then I have a 16-year-old.
Okay.
So Sabrina was the oldest by about 2.5 years.
Okay.
And then the last one was 5 years younger than she was, 5.5 years younger than she was. So, girl and 2 boys. And what's also important, people can't see us or me, but I'm 6'2".
Yeah.
And my daughter is 6'4". And that is a huge element to the story.
Yeah.
And my boys are both 6'9" and 6'8". So we're really big.
Yeah, you are.
And that's a dangerous word, right? I'm saying it now. And that's one of those, red flag words when I, that I feel guilty about when I say, we're just big,
right.
Because that feeds into some of the problems that she had. But we are already an abnormal size. And that kind of made her just that much more vulnerable to becoming anorexic, because she's always felt big.
Okay. So see, that's go ahead, I'm sorry.
The difference between a boy who's big
yes.
and is strong and powerful, and women can be strong and powerful too, but that's not really the image that we project in the media.
Yeah.
That's not how we raised our little princesses to be. And I see that changing in the 22 years since I raised a daughter. I see that changing in the world, empowering girls to be athletic. And I was always an athlete, but that still, I think that has played a big part in her story.
Yeah.
Is that she's so tall, and my parenting, probably because I'm tall too. So there's things I did in raising her that probably didn't help.
Okay. So what I appreciate already, and we're literally 6 minutes in, is that there's going to be, I feel like every single sentence is going to be valuable, right? Like there's so many things that we can unpack here. So Sabrina was the oldest of 3. I want to take us way back to kind of start thinking in terms of parenting, right? You already identified that it was at the age of 13 when she started to experience anorexia. And so I want to take us way back to you, because one of the things that we learned from Michelle and Lisa, as a reminder to the folks who maybe haven't heard those episodes, is first off, they define trauma as our experience of something that happens, right? And it's not an event. It could be an experience that happens over time, right? So that was really important for my own learning, because I think oftentimes when a kid struggles, we think to ourselves, what happened to them? And it's not really about what happened to them, and it probably wasn't any one specific on Monday this terrible, awful thing happened, but more likely an ongoing experience, right, that they had. So we know that to be kind of the more accurate, if you will, definition of trauma. But the other thing that they said that was hugely important was that one of the keys to a parent's capacity to support a child who's experienced trauma is their understanding of their own experience with trauma, right? And that was really fascinating as I listened to them talk about the parenting classes they do, and they start with having the parents take that ACE assessment to see where they rate. So I'm not necessarily asking you to delve deep. You're going to say whatever you want to say, but I want to start there, right? When you think now, right, with that information, and you look backwards, what if any was your own experience that may or may not have influenced just your parenting in general?
Well, I daughter of immigrants, actually was born in the Netherlands. And, so I grew up in a house where parents were trying to adjust to a different culture. They came from a different background.
Okay.
And my dad is, even though we're Dutch, he's German, German birth, and was raised in the Netherlands. So he's got that very Germanic, like strict, cold personality,
Okay.
parenting style. And so I remember at a very young age being like, oh, when I have parents, when I'm a parent, I'm going to be warm and nurturing. So I know from just the fact that at a very young age, I was already making those plans to be more nurturing.
Sure.
That, growing up was kind of a little hard. My dad was strict. We were the weird, crazy Dutch people in a very, Midwestern town where everybody, was 10 generations Norwegian background.
Sure, sure.
And so we didn't really fit in. And, I've already mentioned I was tall, so I was awkwardly tall, and I wore all my brother's clothes growing up and was not the cool kid in any way, shape, or form.
Sure.
Again, thing I didn't want my children to live through, kind
Sure.
of, bullying, teasing because you don't fit in. So I think that those were kind of traumatic. And then there was another element, and that is that my parents are very, very health conscious.
Okay.
They are always talking about being lean and fit, looking attractive.
Interesting.
So I would say that even though I was never diagnosed with an eating disorder, that I certainly experienced a lot of those tendencies in my teenage and early 20s,
Okay.
where I was restricting what I ate and felt like being very thin was important to me. And and it's very ironic. I think about this often, that my daughter ended up with an eating disorder because I thought I had put everything in place not to let her fall
right.
there.
Yeah.
Right? I was already aware that this
Yes.
was a risk for her. So it's almost like your worst nightmare, because I had already lived through some of that and never wanted my kids to experience it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So when she was little, and very, very quickly, was extremely long and tall, and actually was diagnosed with Marfan syndrome. And I don't know if you or your readers or listeners know about this, but it is a very rare connective tissue disorder. And what it does is it makes all your ligaments and tendons extremely loose. You're
Okay.
missing the elasticity. And it makes you taller
Oh, wow.
than you would have been anyway. So you're taking this genetic bundle that she already is to be tall, and then you're adding in this connective tissue disorder, which makes you really tall and spindly and kind of wobbly. And if you have a chance to show some of her artwork on your podcast at the end, all her people that she draws are all exactly like that.
Wow.
Spindly, loose jointed, and that's how she feels. So she was diagnosed with that, and one of the things is that you're not allowed to do any athletics.
Oh, wow.
So she couldn't participate in gym class, and she couldn't ride a bike, and she couldn't run down the street. Like, she wasn't allowed to get her heart rate up at all from the age of 4 on.
Okay.
So she was already dealing with a very, it's a deadly disorder. People die from it all the time.
Okay.
And so she, at a very young age, was, diagnosed with this at 4 and had to be treated very differently. And she would always say, "Mom, tell me again, what is it that makes me special? What is that thing called?"
Right.
And she was first trying to tell her friends what it was, why she couldn't run on the playground and play. And so that really complicated raising her to be confident in her body, to, help her be athletic, which I always was, to kind of own your body. Athletics help you
Right.
feel comfortable in your skin and can give you confidence. So those were all really hard things at a very young age for her to start overcoming. And being awkward and tall certainly didn't help. So trying, to nurture confidence. I knew she was an artist, give her that outlet to be creative. She got, a lot of people always comment on her beautiful artwork. So that was something that was a source of pride for her. Balancing that with having, my husband and I met running. We were both big athletes. Our boys were both really athletic. So that it was hard for her. She felt very left out of the rest of us. And how do you promote, of course it's good to be healthy. I've got 2 other kids in the house I have to be a good role model for. I need to be healthy. That's good for me. But I think that kind of, and I don't want to say it was an obsession with working out. It was just a big, huge part of my life and my husband's life. We ran every day. We lifted weights. We tried to be healthy. And I tried not to talk about dieting or, my body.
Right.
But I was still role modeling that I wanted to be fit. So I think that those were confusing. It was confusing and hard for her because she couldn't do what she would have needed to do to build a confidence in her body. And she was watching the rest of us do it. So I think that was hard. And I'm sure if when you talk to her, she will have stories to tell about how when we talk about the fact that it's not one thing you say or do, but I'm sure there's statements that she remembers hearing me say or her dad say that impacted the way she felt about herself. And then we also, when she was 6, her dad and I divorced. Okay. So she was old enough at the time to live through that. Like the boys were younger. The boys were babies. Right. They were not 4 years old and 2 years old. Not even 2. He turned 2. I think Theo was 18 months old when we split. So she was the oldest sister living through that too. So we again, talking about the podcast you did before about that traumatic experience. Yeah. And having the kids having tools to take care of it, and how that kind of also, slows them down or kind of puts them back a step or two. So if I think that at 6, she went through divorce, how did that impact her? Those are all things that come crashing down on your brain when your child is suddenly in crisis. Yeah. Yeah. Because you're like, what? Okay, let me go back. Day 1, I know I wanted her. I loved her. I held her, what can I go? I think I rewinded my life or her life right to the very beginning. I bet you did. And started replaying, what did I say? When did I do, where did I put the building blocks in the wrong spots? How did I not build her foundation so that she could weather this storm?
So let's kind of pause right there. I mean, that's a really great question that I feel like we all ask, right? We all have the best of intentions, or at least I like to think we do, when we set out on the parenting journey. And I love how you captured, even as a kid, knowing you wanted to be a parent and how you were going to do it based on what your own experience. And I think lots of us have a similar experience to that, right? Because our parents are always wrong and we're going to do it right. And then I think in terms of, yes, as you painted the picture for her of, already as a young child, you could see she was going to be unusually tall for a girl. I mean, that's just the way that is. You don't have to agree with it or disagree with it. That she had this additional condition that significantly impacted her day-to-day life. That you all subsequently went through a divorce. And I think what's really powerful about the way you just captured all that, Charlotte, is that before my conversations with Lisa and Michelle, even as an educator, right, and I'm certainly informed from a trauma perspective, but before that, I wasn't thinking about it in terms of experiences over time. And I think that, especially as I listen to you talk about being a mom and being so thoughtful and deliberate, right? Being so aware of how her height was going to impact her emotionally and trying to counter that, right? While at the same time being your own self and, engaging in your own self-care, etc. And clearly being so careful about all of it. And I think what you described is, she had a lot of significant things happen. And a lot of people do, right? And so and we get through it and we say, okay, this is how I'm going to support my kid in real time, and we're going to get through it, and we're going to do our best, and then we're going to come back and continue to figure it out and offer them support. Some kids run into a major crisis like she did, and some kids don't hit such a major crisis. But my point in all that is you captured all of that, and I think a lot of us could look back on our kids' childhoods and say, yeah, my kid experienced trauma. In the moment, I might not have called it trauma.
Right.
But if I gave them that adverse childhood experience assessment now, they would rate up there, right? Because when I look at it over time and the set of experiences through the brain of a child, knowing, like you said, you only know what you know. Okay, yeah. And so I guess that's probably the whole point of this podcast for us is recognizing it in a way that we might not otherwise. Because as a mom, I wouldn't have thought about it that way, right? So I guess what I'm saying is, it makes me appreciative that we're doing this podcast now, because what I'm asking you to do rather is look back, right, and think about kind of this learning around trauma in terms of how you all supported Sabrina and the experience you had with her. Whereas the whole kind of point of that is for other people to learn from that, right? And be able to look forward with their own children right now and be reflecting on, gosh, wait a second, where would my kid be and where would I be? And what can I take from this to better support them? So with that in mind, take us back to when Sabrina was 13. That's when, as kind of with the basics that you gave us, she started to really experience anorexia, and therefore that kind of shifted you guys all into crisis mode, right? You had been supporting her along the way, right? And then suddenly we're in crisis mode. So what are some of the things that you all kind of inherently understood to do to support her? If you reached out and got resources from the outside and to support her, what did they look like? What worked? What didn't work? That kind of part of the story.
Okay, well, I'm going to jump back just a little bit
Yeah.
to give a little more background information. That is that at age 11 or 12, Sabrina was allowed to start swimming. Like her
Okay.
heart had stabilized, like the aortic root was stable, and they said, you know what, you can swim. Swim is a great, no impact on your joints, so you can't dislocate something. The heart, with the breathing, the heart rate tends to stay pretty low. So she had started swimming, and that was right as she was hitting puberty.
Okay.
And so the body starts changing, and she very logically correlated her swimming with her body slimming down
Sure.
and becoming more feminine. And she started getting compliments. You look so great. You're so beautiful. And it was the first time in her life that she started getting them. And because it coincided with that working out, it was like a magic combination for her. The more I swim, the less I eat, the prettier I'll be, and the more popular I'll be. So we started noticing that she was extremely thin. And again, she's 6'4". She was never heavy.
Sure.
But she was just like, her legs were like toothpicks. And you could see her ribs and her collarbone and all this
Right.
stuff. And so I started watching her, and I was like, you know what, I think there's something going on. So we started, I started reaching out to our pediatrician and talked to her coaches. And I will tell you, there is very little support for anorexia where there was.
Yeah.
So this is, 10 years ago, 9 years ago.
Which is kind of crazy to realize, because I feel like we've been talking about anorexia for a lot longer than that. So that's a little scary.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So I was told I was not right, that she's fine. She's just slender.
Wow.
She was a mess. So something about anorexia is that these girls and boys are very good and very convincing at telling you that you're wrong.
Okay.
And telling their counselors that they're wrong, and telling their pediatricians that everything's fine.
Okay.
They're master liars, and they're lying to themselves.
Yeah.
And so she was like, I am thin boned. I am not built like my mom. Do not, just because my mom, and I think, I'm going to share more information people need to know, but I weigh 165.
Okay.
And she weighed 140. She's 2 inches taller than me. So you can do the math there. And I'm not a heavy person. I'm a pretty lean, athletic 6'. She was 20, at this point, 25 pounds lighter than me and 2 inches taller. So I was like, that's pretty light.
Yeah.
I'm concerned. And so her argument was, I have a different muscle mass than you do. My bones are smaller than you do. My Marfan's makes my ligaments lighter. Like, she came up with all sorts of stuff.
Wow.
She kept, she was supposed to keep diaries of what she ate, and she would have a bite of a Cliff Bar and be like, I had a Cliff Bar for lunch.
Yeah.
Like, she was masterful at playing the game along, well enough to meet the needs of the counselor. So we would go to a couple counseling sessions, and they would basically tell me, she's fine. We don't know, there's no big deal. And the caveat to that is that I could only take her to counseling that was covered under my insurance.
Okay.
And anorexic specific counselors don't take insurance in the state of Virginia.
Oh, how interesting.
In general.
Okay.
They don't. I don't know why. I mean, it is a mystery. I have been fighting it. I don't understand it, but it is just something that's not.
Okay.
So you can find like a general counselor who might say they're experts in anorexia or eating disorders, but they're really not.
Okay.
Like, it's part of their thing. And nobody that was under my insurance at the time was honestly doing their job, because they were letting this kid trick them. And that's, anybody, which we later learned when we dealt with people who were skilled and we were paying out of pocket for these people, is that an anorexic is a great liar. And anybody who works with anorexics knows not to believe a word they say.
Right.
Because it's just not true. I mean, what tells the truth is to measure their body every time.
There you go. Yep.
Measuring their body, measuring their weight. That's how you know if they're eating or not. But so it was a very difficult piece. And this is a child who was not a liar. This is a child who was a straight A student. She was a hard worker. She was a talented artist. There was no history of not being honest or truthful with us. So you want to trust your child and you want to believe them. And guess what? You don't want your kid to be an anorexic. So it's very easy to be like, you're right. Yeah. She's fine.
Yep.
We're going to go back home. And then, she would have 6 months later would have another crisis. And when I say crisis, it wasn't that, she lost 40 pounds and suddenly it was be like the not eating was causing anxiety and anger and disruption of her habits. So we'd be kind of fine. And then something would happen and it would just set her off in anger and frustration. And you're like, okay, this is not okay anymore. Things are not, we thought they were fine, but they're not.
Right.
And this went on for years. I talked to her chiropractor. I talked to our general doctor. I talked to the counselors. We went to several different ones, and it was always like, it's okay. She's fine. Just watch her. She's fine. And then, her junior year, I remember in the fall that I was like, I just don't know if she's depressed and angry and that's why she's losing weight, or she's losing weight and not eating and that's why she's depressed and angry. There was this, she just became, but she's also 17, not quite, she was 16. She's a junior in high school, and guess what junior in high school girls are like?
Absolutely.
They're moody and they don't want to listen to mom, and it's really hard to gauge, is this normal teenage behavior or is this child in crisis? And you really, because you're living with it every day, you don't see the warning signs. You just don't. Like, you might kind of be in tune with them and you're kind of aware, but then you do the steps that you think you need to do, and you're very quick to be like, I think we've got this under control again. Yeah. Because from the time she was 13 on, it was like on, off, get help, we're done, get help, we're done.
Wow.
Get the coaches involved. The coaches weren't really supportive because, I'd say, can you please tell her to eat more so she can swim better? Yeah. They'd be like, swim more.
Oh my gosh.
Not swim more, eat more.
Right. Right.
So, we kind of kept along with doing as we did, and she still had straight A's, and she swam twice a day. She was up at 4:00 in the morning to get to swim practice, and she'd swim again after school. And that's, my son does that now too, but he eats 7,000 calories.
Absolutely.
And she was eating 1,800 calories.
Wow.
But that was a red flag, because if it was a snow day and she couldn't get to swim practice, she would be in tears, curled up on the floor crying because she couldn't get her workout in.
Okay.
When Theo doesn't have practice in the morning, he's like, I get to sleep in. This is awesome. So there was behavior happening that I should have known, like the world's going to end because I missed a workout.
Right.
The world's going to end because I had a piece of cake. Those were kind of signs that I should have been more aware of. But again, you get into this, it becomes your norm.
Yeah.
You know, just like staying at home right now has become our normal.
Yep.
Living with someone that has these ups and downs and has these habits just becomes the normal. And then it wasn't until our school social workers, so it's interesting that your podcasts have been with social workers, because our school social worker was the one, she's a personal friend of mine. Her kids swam too. So I knew her professionally, but I also knew her personally. And she saw Sabrina in the hallway. And Sabrina was so distraught and so out of character that she pulled her right into the office and had a conversation with her. And then she came to me and was like, your daughter's in crisis.
Yeah.
I mean, I had no idea.
Yeah. Crisis at that level, right? Like you said, the cycles had become the norm. And it is hard
she
to
said,
push out what's normal and what's not.
If I didn't know that you would take care of her, I would have committed to her today.
Wow. Which speaks volumes about you as a mom. Doesn't make it easier, but it does speak volumes about you as a mom.
And then you're like, so I can't remember in November, because it was right before Thanksgiving. We were like, we can't institutionalize her. It's the holidays. Like, we can't put her away.
Yeah. It's
her junior year. This is the most important academic year. So, we're sticking Band-Aids all over the place trying to help her. She's eating. So I was a teacher in her building, and I'm still convinced that was divine intervention.
Yeah.
She sat with me every lunch. I had to watch her eat every bite.
Yeah.
And, we're still flying by the seat of our pants because nobody who was an anorexic specialist would see her.
Wow. That's terrifying.
And without paying out of pocket. And I was a teacher. Yeah. I didn't have $50,000 to dump into her treatment, especially when you're still not 100% sure that it's true.
Yeah.
So we make it through the holidays. We're like, we can't do this to her at Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
And then, it's Christmas, and we're like, let's just get through this. And my parents came out to visit for Christmas, and she hit rock bottom. She was it was awful.
Yeah.
So that social worker gave us some names, and they were all just horrible institutions where you bring your child in and they're essentially in a cell. So I called her Marfan specialist at Johns Hopkins, and I explained what was going on. And they brought her in to their department.
Okay.
So they were able to get her an instant appointment because they could circumvent the 6-month waiting list to see.
She was already one of theirs, so they could, yeah.
And I took her in as a 4-hour appointment. And I think for a long time that was the worst day of her life. Okay. I think now she probably doesn't think like that anymore, but she walked into that meeting skinny, beautiful, high school varsity swim team swimmer, heading into championship season, hoping to, swim in college and apply to great colleges. And she walked out of there, officially an anorexic. Organs are shutting down. Your hair is falling out. You are not even allowed to go upstairs. Yeah. You can't even take a flight of stairs to your room anymore because your heart could stop. And she hated us.
Yeah.
She absolutely didn't believe it. She was like, you are trying to ruin my life. You don't want me to be beautiful. You are trying to take all my control away from me. You don't want me to be successful. Like anything, and it's ironic because as a mom, you want everything for your kid.
All of it. Yep.
The last thing I ever wanted was to have her be less beautiful than me
right.
or less successful than me. Like I want her to have more than I ever had, not less. But in her viewpoint, we were taking away everything that mattered to her. And we did. We took away absolutely everything that mattered to her. And we couldn't go to that treatment forever because it's an hour and a half from where we live. But they gave us the name. And they just basically said, she's going to die if you don't do something now. You're going to have to pay out of pocket or she's going to die.
Right.
If you can find her, they put us in touch with someone. They said, you can keep her at home, but you have to keep her on the main level. Somebody has to be physically next to her the entire day for 2 weeks while she refeeds. If you can't commit to that, we have to institutionalize her. And they gave us a name of a psychiatrist in DC, which is, 45 minutes where we live, but much better than Baltimore.
Sure.
That could fit us in right away. It was out of pocket. And, I talk about my first marriage not having been a great one. Patrick has money and he was willing to spend it.
Good.
So he stepped up when he had to step up.
Okay.
Because she wouldn't have gotten that treatment without that.
Yeah.
And we did. We had to refeed her. It's the most awful experience if you haven't lived through that. Her cells didn't know how to absorb food.
Yeah.
Her stomach didn't digest. Like, it had stopped digesting. Her body was eating itself to feed her.
Yeah.
So when she first started eating again, she could only consume boost drinks.
Yeah.
Like, she couldn't, only liquid. And as I was directed, I took 2 weeks off and I laid next to her every day. And this is when I was listening to the other podcast where, I think she said you can't cuddle your 15-year-old and hold them, but we did. Yeah. We went all the way back to babyhood.
Well, they actually talk about that. That's how you treat them.
Better
sometimes.
Liquid diet.
Yep.
Yeah. Better liquid diet, and held her, and I heard her stomach churning.
Yeah.
With the food in it that it couldn't digest, and then eventually she was starting to digest, and she's like, "Mom, every cell in my body hurts. I can feel it." Every cell was coming back to life, essentially. Yeah. And if you read about it, it's like your skin is crawling with insects. That's what it feels like when your body starts refeeding.
Was that enough to help her, feeling that happen? Did that help her believe?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And she's a smart girl.
Yeah.
And she started reading up on it. And she understood the truth.
Yeah. That
she wouldn't be having these refeeding symptoms if she wasn't actually going through the process. So she was smart enough at that point. She's still pissed off.
Yeah, of course.
It's still, we took all the power I tried to empower her with as a woman. Yeah. All the decision making and stand up for yourself and be strong and don't let people tell you what to do. All those things, all were gone. And for a year, we served her every meal.
Yeah. And
we sat with her. And one of the reasons I joined Faster Way is because that year and a half that she stayed in our house with us, I ate with her bite for bite.
I bet you did. Yeah.
Ice cream scoop for ice cream scoop, and she had to eat rich food. And she looked at me and she goes, "I'm not eating this if you're not going to eat it."
Well, there you go then.
And I was like, 3, 9, 40. I do not have your metabolism. And I didn't start 40 pounds underweight. I started, probably at maybe 5 pounds overweight, and kept on, and that, someday, and maybe she's already at that place in her life that she could be like, "Mom sacrificed a lot." Yeah. She ate a lot of ice cream to support me through this. And some of those memories are great, sometimes it's great to go and say, "I don't really care."
Yeah.
I'm not going to care if I gain weight because this is not, gaining weight is not more important than my child. Most important thing. So there were days I would just embrace and be like, you know what? When else can I go out and buy a huge cinnamon roll and slather it and enjoy it? Yep. I'm going to do this with her. So, we definitely had some fun with it. Another thing about anorexics is that they love to prepare food.
Oh, interesting.
Love to cook.
Okay.
And that's part of the disorders, that they prepare food that they don't eat.
Yeah.
I'm going to be like, "Oh, I ate while I was making."
Yeah.
So one of the rules was we couldn't let her cook.
Okay.
Which was punishment for me.
Right.
Because now she was cooking the majority of her meals, which was great.
Right.
And I think that was hard for her too, because she not only liked it because of, whatever, just disorder part of it, but also because she's an artist and she just loved to create food. And so that was a big, that, that year and a half before she went to college were really tumultuous. I mean, she was definitely recovering. She stopped swimming. She started building a social life a little bit. She accepted it. And then she chose a school really far away.
Yeah.
And that was really, really hard for me. It was really hard.
It would be terrifying, I would think. Yeah, to have her go that far away, only a year and a half after she was in the biggest crisis.
And knowing that she wasn't recovered. She just wasn't.
Yeah.
She was on the road to recovery, but she was not recovered. But and she knows herself very well. And she was like, I am ready to do this. I think I need to take some ownership in what's happening. I need to take some control back. And, we kind of eased her back into making her own plate of food and choosing, letting her do a little bit of exercise. And I'm sure she's going to talk about how exercise for her, because she's also anxious, is like the best medicine.
Yeah, of course.
It completely calms her down. But it was also her, the tools she used to stay lean. So that's a struggle she will always have too, because she needs to exercise for her mental, but she needs to moderate her exercise.
Yeah.
So she freshman year was fine. She did moderate exercise. I think she swam with the swim team, but very moderate. Sophomore year was harder. Sophomore year was just a hard academic year for her. And I think because she was feeling out of control academically, like when I say out of control, not like, but like she didn't have control over her success because it was really hard.
Okay.
It wasn't easy for her. She had just had some difficult classes. That she's an artist, she's an art major, but she had to finish up these requirements for her liberal arts degree, and they included math and science. And she's at a really good school, and they were really hard classes. And that May of her sophomore year, she calls us, and this will make sense in a second, but it was the day after my husband got a job offer, or that same day. She calls us Sunday night at like 10, 11 o'clock, and she says, Mom, I'm in crisis. I try to check myself into a facility. They don't take my health insurance, and I'm really scared. I can't live like this anymore. I don't want to live like this anymore. And because she's across the country and we saw her at Christmas time, we had no idea. Yeah. We had no idea that she was hitting rock bottom, and she was letting eating control her everything she did. And the reason that it's important that my husband had a job offer that day was that I could add Sabrina to my insurance.
Yeah.
So she had been under her dad's insurance. That was just the way our agreement was. And Dad, just didn't have a great insurance option.
Sure.
So especially in California, which is out of state for us.
Right.
She had essentially no coverage. So the program that she wanted to enroll in was like $70,000 out of pocket.
Wow.
And we'd already invested that in her junior year. We don't have another nest egg, especially because we're like, here we are again 2 years later, 3 years later in the same position with all of that money gone.
Yeah.
So the next day I called my Blue Cross Blue Shield Massachusetts, which is amazing. And I called them and I said, I want to have my daughter. If she needs to enroll in this facility or to have this treatment, what would you cover? 100%.
Wow.
100%. So, and I've talked about divine intervention before. Me being in the school building with her, where I could be her person, and then that coincidence that my husband changes jobs, which makes it possible for me to start adding people to my insurance.
Yeah.
Just amazing.
Yeah.
And she did come home because I had a couple of conversations with that facility and they were really supportive, but I think we both agreed, the facility and Serena, that she should come home, that she needed to be home.
Yeah.
We needed to put our eyes on her. She barely finished the semester. She did finish it, but she wanted to bail
Yeah.
and come home.
Of course.
And I called them and I was like, is she good? Like, is her life at risk? Do I need to bring her home? And they said, we've met with her several times. The fact that she's come to you now,
Yes.
and we know that there's a path forward, she can make it the last 2 weeks and then come home. And I tried again, even with the Cadillac of health insurance, to find her a facility in Virginia that would take our insurance. They do not exist.
Wow.
Anorexia is the #1 killer of young women. And there wasn't a single facility in the state of Virginia or Maryland, because I called all over,
Sure.
that could take, I think there was one, and it was booked. Like, there was 0 openings.
Right.
So, we kept putting her on waiting lists, kept trying to get a bed somewhere, and she needed to be, to be out of our home, because our home was triggering all the things. This is where her trauma happened, in our home.
Yep.
She refed in this house. She hit rock bottom in this house. So she was not getting better in our home. So we knew she needed to go somewhere where she could get a bed and stay during the day, at least during the day, hopefully overnight. And we kept bouncing around. She went on a trip with her dad, got taken off the wait list. They couldn't put her back on until September or something ridiculous. She would have missed her fall. So she, out of her own, called that facility in California and said, here's my insurance. Could you take me?
Yeah.
And we had her on a plane the next day.
Wow.
Packed up July 5th. Got on a plane, was admitted, and that was a holistic treatment center where they talked about her eating, her physical needs, her medical needs, her emotional needs, her everything. Like, they talked about, it was a completely immersive program.
Okay.
Which she picked. And I think it was hard at times. I think there were a lot of really sick girls there, sicker than she was. And I think it was a huge motivator to get better.
I bet it was.
Too.
Yep.
But she said it was also hard because sometimes these girls would start getting really, really negative, and that it's contagious.
Yeah, of course.
And they would often those girls would get removed and put in a different kind of facility.
Sure.
It wasn't a place for them. And we're, again, I'm in Virginia and she's in California, and I cannot physically see her. I have no idea if it's working. She could be, sitting at the beach telling me she's going to this treatment. And she's 20 years old. I can't call the doctor and say, give me a report, unless Sabrina's given me permission to do it. So, but I think that that's also why it was successful.
Yeah.
It had nothing to do with me.
Because it was her own.
I had no part of it.
Yeah.
And so she's, and she'll talk about this next week, is she has a huge toolkit.
Yeah.
And she talks about her toolkit all the time.
I love that.
And she keeps telling me, she's like, Mom, everybody else is at the level of anxiety that I live in every day.
Yeah.
And I have my toolkit. These poor people that are stuck in their quarantine houses, they don't know how to handle this.
She should be doing a lot of videos right now. Oh my gosh.
So that's a lot. Like, that's the silver lining.
Yeah.
When she finally got there, and she had to be ready for it, and she had to find the right place that was good for her. Like, now she has what she needs, and she's going to have low days and she's going to have good days, but now she knows she can get through the bad days. So she knows there's a light at the end of the tunnel. So, it's crazy, but, I'm cynical enough to think we'll probably hit these lows once or twice again before,
before she's really good. And you can't predict that, but I want to.
She may never be. She may this may be her new normal. Might be, I'm going to have a couple of really rough weeks.
Yeah.
And I'm going to rely on my toolkit. And when that doesn't work, I'm going to get professional help. And she sees counselors, and she'll see a nutritionist.
And all of that is, it's a powerful, I guess, picture of how she can proceed, right? The reality that it's especially when you have an experience like that, it's almost never just over forever. It's often something that you have to be cognizant of for the rest of your life.
Well, you should be.
Exactly.
That it's okay.
Yeah.
It's okay to have really bad days.
Yep.
Because you've weathered them before, and the most
Exactly.
important thing is you're going to have good days too.
Yeah.
And I think that when you understand that as a human being, whether you're the mom or the child or the counselor,
Yeah.
you know, or my online teachers, I'm hearing this from my faculty right now. They're
Right.
like, I had a really, really dark, bad day yesterday, but today's a good day.
But today's better.
But being able to, and I think for a child, and I remember distinctly being, you know, extremely upset in high school.
Yeah.
And thinking that the world was at its end and there was zero reason for me to go on. Because I couldn't imagine that next week would be different than it was today.
That's exactly right.
And I think like that takes maturity.
Yeah.
And I think that's what makes these kids so vulnerable.
Yeah. I think you're absolutely
because they don't have the long view. They can't have it.
Yeah.
It's not possible.
And there's a point in time where they can't hear us talk about it because even though we know now, they can't hear us.
Right.
So,
and part of that whole trauma series too is talking about, you know, like they don't have the verbal skills, even at 17, to express what they're feeling, because when you're in a trauma, like that's stripped from you. Like that ability to communicate and identify what's happening is gone.
Yeah. And you know, Charlotte, when you painted the picture of, you know, holding her and, you know, literally feeding her, and it went right back to what Lisa and Michelle talked about as far as like, you know, for some of it, it's wired into their brain from such an early age. And so, yeah, some of how we have to support them is going back to how we treated them, right, when they were at those early ages. And somebody looking on might go, oh my gosh, she's 17, what are you doing? She's 15, what are you doing? But that's what they need, and we have to meet them where they are. So I want you to think about then, first off, I appreciate that you've shared your journey, because that's exactly what I hoped you would do, right? This wasn't a conversation about the way you perfectly navigated supporting your child who experienced trauma, right? Because you would take that one on the road, right? Although I think there's a lot there for you and Charlotte moving forward to think about as far as a mother and daughter opportunity to share the learning. But more, so for people to kind of get that real experience. And then I guess what I want you to think about now is knowing what you know now, right? You have the gift of hindsight that parents who are listening to this, teachers who are listening to this right now in this moment, who have a child in their life who's struggling, whether they understand why they're struggling or not. In your case for Sabrina, it was, you know, several things, but the crisis point came with her struggle with anorexia, for example, whatever theirs is, right? And they don't have the benefit of hindsight because they're mired in it right now, right? They can hardly see the light of day. So when you think about them and you think about the hindsight that you have, and wrapping all of that up kind of in the final words here, the final thoughts here, what would you share with them? What are the important things for them to know now in the moment, while they're in the moment, that will help them, you know, help their kids to the best extent that they can?
Well, the first thing is your gut instinct is right. My gut instinct told me she was not okay. Yeah. And I let a bunch of people tell me with lots of fancy degrees that she was fine. Yeah. Including her, you know, she didn't have fancy degrees, but she was telling me she was fine. And I think if I had listened to my gut, and, you know, my son, who's now 16, at 13, also started to show signs of severe anxiety, not anorexia, but anxiety. And we nipped that in the butt. I followed my instinct, got the very best doctor we could. He went to therapy for 8 months, and he is fine. Yeah. You know, we were able to avert crisis with him. And that's because I had learned from my experience. And I didn't wait for it to get bad. Yeah. I got involved early. And I think early intervention is the biggest thing. I think, you know, so following your gut instinct, intervening early. So if you think something's wrong, do something about it. Yeah. In the worst case, your kid gets extra support. Right. They get extra counseling. Right. They get extra love. Right. There's nothing harmful there. And then I think expect roller coasters. You know, teenagers are at this age where they have to fight. That's natural instinct to fight against your parents. Yeah, you're trying to become an independent human being. And that's normal. And you're going to have good days and bad days. But the good days will always, well, almost always, you're going to have your good days. Yeah. To follow, you know. I mean, I will tell you that it's kind of a sad note to end on, but that fear of losing your child, that never leaves you. Yeah. You know, it just never does. So I think it's a kind of I don't don't want to call it a cloud, but it's the nagging feeling in the back of your head when you've watched your child suffer to that degree, that it's very hard to shake that. But all the more reason to jump in early intervention. Yeah. And then, when and I've seen this from a bunch of kids who've gone through anorexia, until your child is really ready to commit and accept, like, you can assist them and you can make it better than it is, but until your child really is ready, they're not going to have a successful recovery. Yeah. And that's just, you have to be patient. Like, you can't force that. You can't shake your kid and say, it's real. Right. Like, so I guess you have to be patient. Yeah. Be patient with yourself and be patient with your child, because eventually the instinct for self-preservation is so strong, they will want to fix it. And you might have to wait a month or you have to wait 4 years. Yeah. But eventually your child will want to be better. And that's when the corner turns, or they turn the corner. My idioms are awful.
We got you.
Yeah. So, okay. and I will tell you that watching her come out of that now, choosing her own recovery and seeing her really blossom to really become a strong adult, really almost the opposite of what she was, if I look at her at 17, that weak child laying on the couch, to this strong woman right now who is advocating for others. And I mean, that she wouldn't have gotten there without her own decision to get there. So it was worth the wait. Yeah. It was worth the wait to see her. And I guess another growing moment for me was when she said, after her final therapy, she said, Mom, I would never go back and undo what I've lived through, because I wouldn't be who I am today if I hadn't lived through what I've lived through.
That's pretty powerful, right? And that's huge.
I think I'm just done. Yeah, and right there.
I think that's it, and I think that's perfect, Charlotte, because I think that if a kid who experiences trauma like Charlotte did can get to that point where they recognize that they are who they are because of it,
and the self-love, the ability to love who they are, just the way they are.
Yep, that's it. You are really amazing for sharing all of this with us and being so honest and vulnerable. So thank you for that, because I know there are parents who are going to listen to this and who are going to, in the moment, stop and have some realizations that they wouldn't have otherwise. So thank you for that.
You're welcome. If it can save one person to go through what we've gone through, it would be well worth it.
There you go then. All right. Thank you. So Melissa, it was really, really fascinating to me to listen to Charlotte talk about Sabrina's experience.
Yes.
And it made me, of course, I'm completely intrigued and can't wait to actually hear Sabrina's version of the story next week, because
same here.
Right? What we know from Michelle and Lisa is that it's going to be different, right? That no two people can have the same experience, even of the exact same thing, right?
Exactly.
Charlotte actually even said to me after the interview that she's looking forward to hearing Sabrina's version, because she expects it to be different as well, right? And they've done, as you can imagine, over the years, so much healing together, but that it will continue to inform her, right? Because even though, we're talking to Charlotte and Sabrina because Sabrina is kind of on the healing side of everything. Mm-hmm. What Charlotte tells us there toward the end is that, they'll always live with this. And so all of these things can be beneficial to them. What strikes me out of the gate really is how much Charlotte reflects, right? Like, I think the story of a lot of us parents especially who have adult children, is that we look back and we think, okay, here's what happened. And here's what I did, and here's why I did it, and here's what I wish I had done, right?
And the big question, was it enough?
Yes.
Was it enough? Was it right?
Yep.
Was it okay? Is this on me? I think that's a natural thing for parents, and she captured that really well.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And in the moment, here's the reality, right? In the moment, we can only do what we feel is best for our kiddos, right? And this series really is about, this 4-part series on trauma really is about how we help people listening, right? How those of you who are listening to us right now, who are in the moment, gain some learning that will help you do it better, for lack of a better expression, or at the very least, look back 5 years from now, 10 years from now, and feel like you knew more, so you could do more, right? That would help your kiddo through the crisis that he or she might be experiencing. So that's kind of, the ultimate goal of this 4-part series. So, let's go ahead and jump in, Melissa. I'd love to hear a little bit about some of the things that were really important to you as you listened to Charlotte and her experiences with Sabrina.
Absolutely. I do want to say, though, Janice, that when you told me, okay, we're going to be doing a 4-part series on trauma, I'm always excited to see what we're going to be talking about, who we're going to be talking to. But I really didn't think this series would have this impact on me, because I never associated trauma with anything in my life or the lives of people that I know and care about.
Yeah.
I'm wrong. Like, I was very wrong.
Yeah.
And this is really teaching, it's completely changing what trauma even means for me, or for the world, really.
Yeah.
But that's been really big, because the thing that one of the main things that stood out to me, and there was so much, there's always so much that I have a hard time condensing.
I know, right? Narrowing it down.
But the fact that trauma is not, and we keep saying it, but it's so important. Trauma is not a thing that happens.
Yeah.
It's, I think for most of us, and I can certainly speak for myself, when I think of trauma, I think of abuse, physical abuse.
Yep, that's exactly right.
Or mental abuse. A thing like a child being sexually molested, or, being beat by a parent, or, that kind of thing. But the thing that Charlotte said that really, shook me and woke me up again was something as simple, and it's not simple, but something like divorce.
Yes.
Where one child might go through parents divorcing and be perfectly fine, and it's okay, they're divorced, but they're still my parents. Another child, that can be traumatic for them.
That's exactly right.
And so now we have a child dealing with trauma over something that really had nothing to do with them, wasn't intended to hurt them. Like, I think a lot of times we think about trauma as an intentional pain, or some major event that happened to that child, and it's not.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really big lesson, and it reinforces what Lisa and Michelle have said, in that it's important that we treat everyone as if they've had a trauma.
Oh my gosh.
Because we have no idea of knowing who has. And we could have, like we were speaking about last week, two people can grow up in the very same household and experience something that happens completely differently.
Yeah.
So something that may have been perfectly fine for me could be a traumatic event for a sibling.
That's exactly right.
And I think that is such a powerful message, and hopefully, it reinforces to everyone what we all see on social media and memes, and we hear in motivational speeches, but everybody has a story.
Yeah.
And we have to treat people with kindness, because it is impossible to know what that story is and how that story affected them.
Yeah.
Which is the basis of what trauma is.
Yep.
So that's always a really big point for me, and it's reinforced every time I hear one of these. But Charlotte certainly drove that home for me today when she spoke about the divorce and how it may have impacted Sabrina, and how she wasn't even sure.
Well, and that's an important piece, right? Like, for Sabrina, to your point, it wasn't necessary. She was a great example of, there's no one thing I can narrow it down to. I mean, I guess, when a child experiences something intentional, like you said, right? They've been physically abused in some way, etc. It almost feels easier, right? Because we can point to that. Right. But for Sabrina, it was being born with a condition that physically affected her every single day. Adding to that she, from a hereditary perspective, a genetic perspective, she was going to be a large child who was a young girl, who that has its own implications, right? When we think about social imaging for girls, right? Coupled layer then on top of that, the parent's divorce, right? And how fascinating it was is that it wasn't until she was 13 and just slammed into anorexia that Charlotte kind of, thought to herself, okay, hold on a second. Like, she knew all along, like she said, like she knew from the beginning raising a daughter who was going to be taller would have its own challenges. Right? This was going. She knew
Yep.
it's not like she thought that were going to be easy, but she couldn't. She certainly didn't understand that it could all be kind of coming together.
Exactly.
To result in this crisis that began for them.
That's exactly right. And I think that the other powerful thing that she said, okay, let me say this. The reason that I think this podcast in particular is so important is we do get to hear from, like, I'm eager to hear Sabrina's story.
Yes.
But I think Charlotte's story is just as important because a lot of times when we think about trauma, we do think about the person who experiences the trauma.
That's true. Yep.
We don't necessarily think about the parent or the siblings or any of that.
That's exactly
And
right.
when we do, let me be very clear, and often in most cases, it's to blame them.
Yeah.
How did she miss this? How did she not know?
Yep.
What did she do wrong? She or he, because fathers as well, but
Of course.
because we're speaking of Charlotte, that's why I'm focusing on the she. But in a lot of cases, we place the blame on parents, or we judge parents because it's easier. Yeah, we judge them. Like, how did she not know this? How did she not know her 13-year-old daughter was in crisis? That kind of stuff. So to hear Charlotte be so open about, number one, not knowing.
Yeah.
Number two, kind of accepting the stories that Sabrina came up with because it was simply easier.
Yes.
Being in denial was easier than facing that something was wrong. So when Sabrina's saying everything's fine, when doctors are saying everything's fine, even though Charlotte had that feeling herself that something wasn't right, it was very easy for her to just go with that, because who wants to think that their child is in a bad place? Nobody.
Exactly.
No, nobody, at least not, like you said in the interview, parents with good intentions, we want the best for children. Nobody. So if you're getting told by the child, you're getting told by the doctors, the professionals, that everything's okay, then we as the rest of society, we think parents are supposed to have some magic button that just makes them know that things are, no, it doesn't work like that. Parents are human too.
Yeah.
And that's what I got from that. I think her pain was so powerful. I'm so grateful that she was able to let that happen.
Yes.
During the podcast, like, just be real about it. It hurts her still.
Yes.
Even though like you said, there is no other side, but they can see a light now.
Yes.
Which they may not have been able to see in the tunnel before. But even seeing that light, she still keeps glancing back at the dark.
Yep.
Because it's still what feels like it's still creeping up on her. So, like, this was so eye-opening for me in terms of what it must be like to parent a child with that has had a traumatic experience. That was very powerful for me.
Well, and I love that you dug into that idea of how we can just let it be okay. And to your point about how easy it is to be on the outside, right? And to judge and to question and, if it were my child, I would never miss that, which I feel like that's like always the telling sign in the bad horror flick, right? Or the story about the sociopath is, if it were my child, I would have known he was psycho. But
exactly.
But it is that human nature, right? We want our kids to be okay. So our human nature is to rush through to the solution. What's going to solve this so that they can be okay, right? And like you said, and Charlotte said, we tamp down our instincts. And again, like you said, she had all these professionals agreeing and saying, no, she's fine. And we tamp it down. And then ultimately what happens is that we actually end up creating more space for the experience of trauma to grow and grow and ultimately manifest itself in some way. And of course, in Sabrina's way, we know it was anorexia, followed then by the onset of anxiety, etc. So I think that's such an important part. And I give Charlotte so much credit because I know, like all of us, I think when we look back, we beat ourselves up more than we congratulate ourselves. Again, human nature.
Absolutely.
And you can hear how she beats herself up for letting her instincts be, kind of dampened or put to the side or what have you. And yet, I just congratulate her for finally responding when she did, because honestly, I know too many stories of parents who don't. right? Who parents who
Absolutely.
don't get the resources for their kids, parents who, and I'm not casting judgment there, because that can even be for a variety of reasons, but simply
Yes.
that they don't. Parents who have their own, who are so mentally and emotionally scarred by what's happening themselves that they literally don't have the capacity, which is why this series is important to me, both through the parent lens and the school lens, because frankly, and I said this last time, school saved me, and not because people there were handling my trauma because they didn't know I was experiencing trauma, but because it was a sanctuary, right? So that's why it's so important to me that we have this audience that is both, because sometimes the parent literally doesn't have the capacity. So it's, I think that looking back and being able to say, here's what I knew and understood, here's what I did, here's why I did what I did. And I love that I feel like Charlotte got there, right? That she was
Yes.
able to really express why they did what they did when they did it, which was significant, obviously. And it's terrifying to think that you can get that close to your child dying, but I don't think that's rare. And that was another one of the big takeaways for me, is that I don't think that's rare.
Yeah, and I think the thing I know Charlotte's going to listen to this, and so I hope she hears me say, Sabrina said she wouldn't change anything about her experience because it made her who she is.
Yep.
I hope Charlotte knows that includes the way this whole thing happened.
Yep.
How long it took to figure it out, getting the necessary help, maybe, feeling like you didn't do all that you needed to. Sabrina accepts that was necessary for her to be who she is.
Yep.
I hope Charlotte understands that too. I know that guilt as a parent. I know it. And I know it's hard. I can't imagine it when you have to refeed your child and see them in pain, all of that went with it. But I want Charlotte to know that there was a purpose in that.
Yeah.
And that purpose was in getting Sabrina to where she is now, which is able to see that light and able to be better and to continue to heal. So this was so powerful to me in that we don't often give parents an opportunity to be vulnerable.
Yeah.
We make parents feel like, and when I say we, I mean society as a whole, we make parents feel like they are supposed to be superheroes and they can't do anything wrong, and everything that happens wrong is their fault, and how dare they mess up. And the truth is, and I keep saying, parents are humans, and there's no rule book, there's no parenting this 101, this is how you do it. Like, every child is different, every experience is different, every parent is different, and parents are bringing their own experiences into how they parent.
Yeah.
So we as parents have to hear Charlotte's story and give her the grace of being human, and see the strength that it takes to not only go through what she went through, but then share that with an audience of strangers with the sole purpose, as she said, of helping even one person. Yeah. Like, that is a powerful, strong, beautiful human being. And if nobody else tells her, she helped me just by listening to this podcast. Yeah. Absolutely. I had my own struggles with bulimia, not anorexia, but with bulimia. And so hearing how it could have gone, it's very powerful. Like, that will make me keep an eye out on the young girls in my life. Hearing Charlotte was, I think, the necessary first step to prepare us in hearing from Sabrina.
Well, and Melissa, you said that beautifully. And the two things that your statements, your reflections make me think of are, first, that what a great time to remind ourselves that all of us are first-time parents too, with every single one of our children, whether it is your oldest child or your youngest child, you're a first-time parent, because every child is different.
That's right.
And so we're all sitting here going, oh my gosh, we had no idea, how hard teachers work and the role of the teacher. We're all being thrust into that role. We don't give ourselves the grace, and we don't acknowledge that nobody gave us a how-to book on parenting. Yeah, there are a lot of books out there, but we're not innately perfect parents. There's no such thing really, right? And so we have to, remind ourselves that with every child we, encounter, we're a first time parent. And so we can't possibly know, right, all the answers and know exactly how to do it. And we've talked before about how important it is as a parent to really just be able to say, look, this is first time I'm handling a 15-year-old boy who thinks he knows everything, right? So let's figure out how to do this together, because I'm not going to pretend I know, right? But the other piece that it triggered for me was how important it is to question our assumptions, right? Because, for example, it shocked me how hard it was for her to get services to treat Sabrina's anorexia. We've been talking about anorexia in this country and in this world for decades. And so I was walking around with the assumption that, gosh, if I had a daughter right now who had anorexia, it's scary, terrifying, yes, but would I be able to get services? Of course, I'm sure there's plenty of services.
Right.
And to realize, no, there's not.
No,
right? Yeah,
there's not. And that it surprised me and disgusted me, if I can be completely honest, because it's not like you said. It's not like it's a secret. It's not like we don't know. It's a real thing.
Yeah.
It's not like we don't have it. Like I think I mentioned to you, in our personal conversations. Like I remember watching episodes of old talk shows like Donahue and Sally Jesse Raphael.
After school specials.
Many of our listeners probably won't even recognize those names because that's how long ago it was. But they would have people on who were suffering from anorexia and were, near the point of death. So we've known about anorexia for so long. How shameful that 10 years ago, she couldn't get help for her child without jumping through hoops and spending, tens of thousands of dollars. Like that alone, hopefully, will help someone in knowing that you may have to take alternative routes to get help for your child. It's sad, but it's the reality.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So I'm going to wrap us up by echoing your thanks to Charlotte. Her vulnerability really gives each of us a chance to evaluate, right? Whether we have kids who are grown now and we're looking back as she did with us, right? Or we have kids who are, young and in our homes right now and still in that growing phase. What her vulnerability really does is it takes everything we learned from episodes 9 and 10, and it creates space for us to put aside what we thought we knew and evaluate where are our kids, right? Where are my kids right now? How do I know? What do they think? Is there a crisis that I could be mitigating right now by rethinking what I thought I knew about trauma and its impact, right? So for the people who are listening right now, if you didn't listen to episodes 9 and 10, I'm really going to encourage you to go back and couple, Charlotte's conversation with us today with 9 and 10. It would be easy to just want to listen to her and take the pieces that she offers us because they're powerful, but I promise you they are more powerful when combined with the pieces from 9 and 10 and that basis learning. And they're going to be even more powerful as we look ahead to next week. So let's look ahead to episode 12, which is the last episode of season 1. And very simply put, we are going to tie this conversation around how we support kids who are experiencing trauma all together by, of course, hearing from Sabrina, Charlotte's daughter, who's going to share with us her journey as she experienced it. She's the only one who can share it with us that way.
Absolutely.
And I am just excited and a little bit scared to hear it, just because I think it's going to draw out its own emotion from all of us. But Sabrina, when you think about what Charlotte has shared, Sabrina is really not that far off of her most recent treatment of her anorexia. And so she is going to open up and she's going to share with us both what she feels like is most important for us to know about her story, and that is for her to decide, and also how we can think about her story in terms of how we continue to support kids who are experiencing trauma. So episode 12 coming to you next week. Make sure you tune in and we'll get to it.